Good morning. My name is Susan Valdez, and I hope you're having a great day. And I just want to say thank you for allowing me to be a part of that day and to have the opportunity to talk about a title company and the role that a title company plays in a real estate transaction. There are actually two primary roles. One of them is we provide settlement services, but we don't usually use that term. You'll hear it more often referred to as closing. And all closing is when the seller and the buyer come in to sign paperwork, including any legal documents that have to be signed and notarized at the time. But the other primary role of a title insurance company is actually to insure title to the property through a title insurance policy. And so when you as the buyer are out there looking for your home, whether you're looking for it on your own or you're working through a realtor, it's really important to you to find that perfect home for your family. And while you're doing that, you're also working with a lender to get the financing in place for when you do find that home to purchase. The lender's going to, of course, have their process. First thing they're going to do, of course, is get an application from you. And then as the transaction progresses and you, the buyer, you find that home, well, the next thing the lender is going to ask for is an appraisal of the property. And then as it progresses, then they'll want a survey of the property. And then once you get towards the end and you are going to come to closing, then the lender will ask the buyer to make sure they purchase that homeowner's insurance to have that at the time of the closing. In case any damage happens to the residence, you have that insurance. But there's one other thing that the lenders require, and it starts early on in the process of the transaction, and that's the title insurance. Now, most buyers are not familiar with title insurance, but what a title company does. We insure title to the real property. And when I say real property, yes, I do mean literally the dirt, the land, the lot, however you want to call it. But it is the property that the house sits on, and it's very important because if there is an issue with the title to the real property, it's not like you can say, okay, well, I like this residence. I'll just take this residence and move it over here to this property. Because we all know it's a pretty permanent structure on that property. So what kinds of issues are we talking about and how do we find out about them? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. So every single piece of property has a history, and its history is recorded through documents that have been filed at the county courthouse. And this has started over 100 years ago. There are very old documents that were recorded that they are at the county courthouse. And each one of those documents tells a story about the property, your property. And it's up to the title company to search those courthouse records and find each of those documents. And once they find them, the examiner, that's what we call the person who's doing all the research on that property. He reviews them, and those that he says he or she determines do affect the title to the property get put into a report, and we call that report the title company. Now, in old days, we used to actually have to physically go to the courthouse and search the records. Now we do it all on our computers, so it's a lot easier and a lot less time consuming. But that report is going to show the name of the persons or the company that own the property, and those persons or company as sellers, that gives them the legal right to sell the property to you, the buyer. And of course, we find this information in the courthouse records. We look for the last deed of record. The warranty deed is what actually conveys title in a transaction. So we're looking for that last deed to tell us who actually owns the property. And once that deed is filed at the courthouse, it tells everyone who the owner of the property is. But the title company also checks other documents to see if a lender, for example, is owed any money. Because Maybe when the seller bought the property, they also got a loan to buy the property with, and they still have a balance owing on that loan. And so that's really important that be taken care of by the time you get to closing and you're going to become the new owner. So if there is a lien by a lender against the property, we're going to show that on our report, and that will get paid off and taken care of at the closing. And so that's another important document that we're looking for in the courthouse records. Who owns the property and do they owe money on it? But aside from these two basic things, there's other documents that will affect title to your property. Some of them are pretty normal, pretty standard, especially, for example, in a subdivision, if you're buying a lot. A lot of times in subdivisions, the utility companies, for example, will retain an easement for themselves. In other words, they file a document that says, I, the light company, for example, will have the right on these 10 feet of your property to use it to bury our cables, and later on in the future, if those cables need to be maintained or replaced, they have the right to come onto your property and do the work that they have to do. And that's pretty standard. But another thing that the examiner is also going to do is they're going to check the records, the courthouse records, for any name liens against the current sellers and the current buyers. And when I say liens, I mean abstract of judgment, liens, and also bankruptcy. We do check bankruptcy records for the individuals or the companies that are selling and buying property. And when I say abstract of judgment, I'll give you an example. It could be a furniture company, and someone bought furniture and did not pay off the debt to the furniture company. So the furniture company files a suit. They get a judgment from the court saying, yes, these parties named here do still owe the furniture company money. Now, it could be the persons that are the seller that's involved in the transaction, or it could be someone with a similar name, but that's up to the persons handling the closing to figure out if it's the persons they're dealing with or someone else with a similar name. But in a purchase, usually an abstract of judgment is not going to affect the title to the property. Now, what will affect title to the property is a type of lien known as a child support lien. And if it is in fact, the seller or a prior seller that maybe had that child support lien, that does need to be taken care of at closing or before closing, because you as the buyer don't want that affecting the title to your property. Same thing with the bankruptcy. We're going to check names to see if any of the parties are involved in a bankruptcy, because again, that does affect the transfer of the property to the new buyer, whether the bankruptcy is in the buyer's name or in the seller's name. So that's what we're going to check for. And we're going to include everything that we find in our report, which we call the title commitment. Now, one other thing that we check very carefully also are real property taxes, because we want to make sure that all the taxes covering that property are paid up to and including the current year, the year before. So if you're closing in 2020, all taxes need to be paid current up to 2019. But we're also checking because at some point there may have been a tax suit filed for non-payment of taxes. And although the taxes finally got paid, sometimes they don't pay the court costs or the attorney fees, and those still show up as owing. So we're looking for that too. And the reason we're so careful about taxes is because on your title insurance policy, we're actually covering any taxes that are not paid. So we want to make sure that everything's paid. I like to compare title insurance to auto insurance because I think that's what most people can relate to. You purchase a car and then you're required to buy insurance covering your car in case in the future you have any damage to the car. Well, then you call your you call your auto insurance company and they take over. They handle your claim and they get your car fixed and everything is well. Well, title insurance is the same thing, except that it insures real estate. And again, that's the land, the lot, or the dirt, however you want to think about it as. But it's insuring things that once you own the property may come up that happened in the past, that happened years ago. And for example, there's coverage under the title insurance policy if it turns out in the future that somebody forged a deed years ago. Or let's say that the property was in the name of a husband and wife who have since passed away, and their children conveyed out the property. They sold it, but they forgot to mention there was a missing sibling who they hadn't seen in years, didn't know where he was. And then the sibling shows up years later and says, wait a minute, this is my parents' property and I never signed anything, so I still have an interest in this property. So those are the kind of things that are defects in title that are covered under that title insurance policy. And it could be taxes, for example. If we did find out after, let's say 2 years, you've owned your property for 2 years, all of a sudden you get a notice from the tax office saying that there are taxes owing on the property from 5 years ago. Well, sometimes this happens because of human error, either on the part of the company who did the tax service or on the part of the tax office itself. They will discover an error and they're going to correct it. So that's when the notice gets sent to the current property owner. But you look at the notice and you say, wait a minute, I didn't own the property 5 years ago. I just bought it 2 years ago. So you may go to the tax office to explain to them you weren't the owner 5 years ago. Well, they're going to let you know that the taxes are due and they have to be paid. So what do? You don't know these people and you don't even know where to find these owners from 5 years ago. And even if you did find them, they may say, well, we don't own the property anymore, so we're not going to pay taxes. We're not going to be responsible for those taxes. So then what? You go and you hire an attorney maybe? Well, all that takes a lot of time and all that takes a lot of money. But under your title insurance policy, you have coverage that guaranteed you, insured you that all taxes were paid. So just like you do with your auto insurance, you file a claim under your title insurance policy. And then they step in and they take care of that claim for you. And so what this does is title insurance is like your peace of mind. And the best part of it is that the cost is one time. It's not like auto insurance policy where we have to renew it every year. And as you and I know, most of the time that auto insurance goes up. No, with title insurance, you pay for that one time. It covers you as the buyer, as the owner, for as long as you own your property. And even if you should no longer be around and your heirs are now your owners of the property, it insures them as well. So considering that for most of us, our home is our biggest investment, title insurance is a great product and it offers great value and peace of mind to you, the homeowner. So that's it for me. Thank you so very much. I've enjoyed being with you.